Aloha and welcome to Better Government. As the American saying is to do things better, faster, quicker, cheaper, so too in your government, we should be better. I'm your host, Representative Gene Ward from the Kalama Valley to Hawaii Kai. And today we have an interview with the representative from Ewa Beach, Representative Bob McDermott. Bob, welcome to Better Government.
Thank you, Gene. And it's great to be with you.
And it's good that you're back in the legislative seat that you occupied a number of years ago. And I know you're just waiting to get back on the track for education that you've really had not only a passion and desire for, but you want to see improvement in the education of the kids of Hawaii. Tell us about some of the things that are going on in the legislature.
Well, thanks. And first I want to tell the people in Hawaii Kai what a great representative they have, because you've been fighting the fight for well over 20 years. And you're an elder statesman, and you have a lot of corporate knowledge and wisdom of the body, and you can go back and you can see when bad things are coming up, and we've tried to do some of that this session, stop bad things. So your leadership is greatly appreciated.
That's very kind of you, and I'll obviously have to pay him after this is over, unsolicited comments of such, but let's go into education.
Okay.
Let's look at education.
So the big thing coming up this session, well, I really think there's three main issues. First is the preschool program, which we'll discuss. You have the thing that's been under the radar is the principal's performance contract that was agreed to by the DOE and the principals union, and then you have the teacher's contract. So all very important. Gene, one thing people need to know is education is the largest thing in our budget, as you know, because you do the budget, you're on Finance Committee.
In fact, I would submit that the rise and fall of our nation is contingent upon education.
Right.
If we don't have the great equalizer, socioeconomic melding through education, we are not going to progress as a society. And if we are 43rd in the nation in Hawaii and like 14th in the world, we need to put all of our guns on education. And I know you focused. Which one of those do you want to focus on first?
Well, it is that big and that important. We have 34,000 full-time equivalent employees in the Department of Education. That's more than First Hawaiian Bank, Bank of Hawaii, Hawaiian Airlines, Matson, A&B, all those combined. This is huge undertaking. Hasn't been audited ever, as far as I can tell. We have enormous inefficiencies, and it's the most important thing we do. Yet, have you heard really any meaningful reforms coming through this session?
Scores are coming up a little bit. There's an appointed Board of Education heretofore always being elected and accountable. Now it's really the governor's office where accountability is. So actually, if people are not satisfied with what's going on in our schools, they can go directly to the 5th floor of the Capitol, whereas before it was so diverse in its representation.
Well, we could spend hours on education, but the Board of Education, appointed by the governor, they're accountable to the governor, he's accountable to the people, is a policy-making body. It is not to be confused with a management body, which would be more at the school level. Paul Berman pointed this out in a report he wrote in 1988. So the board sets general policy. They set core curriculum standards. But the curriculum, which would be a tool for implementation, is left up to the schools. Some schools don't have any money to do a curriculum. So like core knowledge, you remember that years ago, we talked about core knowledge. So what they do is the teacher has to put together their own lesson plans and develop their own curriculum to meet these core curriculum standards. Core curriculum standards are not a curriculum in and of itself.
But it should be, in my opinion.
Well, we should have a curriculum.
It should be. Curriculum is all over the world and available, and we have.
Well, it is, but they have to cobble it together
Yeah.
themselves. So on one hand, it's good because you give the teachers freedom in their communities. On the other hand, if your principal is not engaged and is on the road plan, retired on active duty, they're
That's
not.
the road plan?
That's the road plan. Whatever you do, just get them to class on time, and you're not going to get any meaningful reform. But I digress. So let's go back to preschool. So the proposal before us, it ties into the teacher's contract. This preschool proposal ties into.
You're talking about early learning.
Early learning.
Early learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ties into the preschool contract. I support the early learning. It is an optional program, as you and I have both found out within the last week when it came to the floor. The optional choice of early learning allows parents to choose private schools, provided those private schools are not religious in nature. I find this a contradiction, especially when we have to amend the Constitution to do it. Most people thought they could go to, say, a Catholic school, or you want to go to a Japanese early learning school where you learn Buddhism, Shintoism, whatever it may be. That would be okay because parents choose. And if a parent doesn't want to go to that religious school, they could send their child to the public preschool or the secular preschool. I guarantee you parents will go in droves to the religious-orientated preschools because they want their children inculcated with those values that aren't available on a daily basis and certainly not available to a large degree in the secular preschool. So that's problematic for me.
You're sure that the demand would be that high?
I'm certain of it. Certain of it.
Okay, I wasn't sure when you said the demand would be overwhelmingly high, because I know right now 15 to 18% of our kids are into private schools, but that's usually
But the parents have to pay for that.
Yeah, that's usually
so if the parent is given a choice to go to a secular preschool or a religious preschool of their choice, and so if I'm Jewish and there's a Jewish preschool, and I have a choice between sending my children to a Jewish preschool or a secular, I'm going to choose a Jewish preschool all day long and twice on Sundays.
You sure it's not the private issue that may be primary? That it's private and happens to be...
No, we already have to amend the Constitution because we're giving money to a private school. So we're already amending it because the Constitution says you cannot give state tax money to private schools. So we're already amending it to make that
bill
possible.
that's one of the bills that's going to, if it passes, it's going to go before the people of Hawaii, correct?
Right. So we're already saying it's okay to do it for private. So we have to amend the Constitution anyway. So now we're amending the Constitution, but we're only going halfway there. We say, okay, you can go to private preschools, but they can't have a crucifix on the wall, or they can't have a statue of Buddha anywhere. Can't have any religious values at all because, I guess, political correctness. I don't know what's in the heads of these people who wrote the legislation. I can't fathom why.
You know, that's interesting in the sense of the separation of church and state. I was looking at to the point that I was trained as a scientist from an empirical basis. Over the last 200 years, how much has America become a Christian nation? In fact, if anything, it's becoming less.
Correct.
So the separation with its looser enforcement has basically affected nothing in terms of its, quote, inculcation, which to me is a bit of a different understanding of what was really meant by the whole separation of church and state. It meant that you, the Catholic Church, or you, the Episcopal Church, or you, the Congregational Church, you could not become like the Church of England or the Church of the Netherlands and then dictate what pew fees were and other things, so people would find out that in effect they have a choice, and in this case it's where we've gone overboard and separating the church and the state.
Right, we could spend a whole show
That's another whole show, which we won't bore you with right now.
Just for your review, I mean, Maryland was, Virginia was the Church of England. Maryland was the Catholic Church of Maryland. Pennsylvania was the Quaker Church. And these states, they were all those, Pennsylvania, the Quaker religion was the state religion. Maryland was a Catholic state. Virginia was a Church of England state. Well, that's where we came up with separation of church and state because
one wanted to get on the top of all of those particular.
Exactly. So they said, stop it, knock it off. And so the Maryland disbanded and they took the state religion out, and I think the rest followed. But that's another show. So preschool, problematic because of that.
But you don't question the value of getting kids to learn at the earliest possible day. That is probably where the core agreement is, that the earlier you get kids to learn, the more they're going to learn, the better they're going to be brain prepared. I remember when our daughter was a small baby, they said the synapses in the brain click when you're reading to them, when you're activity, and when you're relating to them. So the earlier the education, obviously the better. Now the mechanics of it you're speaking of, tend to muddy the water a little bit, and that's why I want you to continue with the private versus.
So we let's just say that's the program. Now we only have a half hour here. So what's problematic about this is an enormous new expenditure. First year I think is $12 million for setup, and then you go to $49 million, and 3 years out you're at $120 million. This is growing exponentially, and every parent will take advantage of it because it's quote unquote free or based on a sliding income scale. So it's a big expenditure. Now, as the governor's proposing this enormous new expenditure, he's fighting with the teachers over a less than 2% raise. Teachers are made whole now. They're back, and they want a 2% raise. He's offering a 2% raise, but he's increasing their health care share, so it's less than 2%. It's like 1 point something percent. They're unhappy. So you have a giant new expenditure, and you have teachers who've sacrificed several $1,000s over the last 5-6 years, and they don't feel they've been made whole. So that's real problematic.
Now you mentioned the teachers, and I think we have to really burrow down into that one because there's nothing more important in education than the teachers. But I wanted to mention one other thing as a precautionary measure, and again, using data and empirical evidence.
Right.
If you remember, the Head Start program was going to be for all on the war and poverty for the young kids who didn't have the wherewithal economically and socially.
It's a failure.
To get a Head Start. We spent $84 billion to say what you just said. The study that they did, and everybody's not questioned the results, they said that really Head Start didn't work. In effect, the kids who were supposed to be watching those TV programs in Sesame Street were not doing it, and the young middle class kids were doing it, and they were even getting all the smarter and all the more ahead than who it was intended for. So in terms of the governor's early Head Start or the early education for children, I would like to see the lessons learned in the Head Start program so we don't reinvent the wheel and end up making that same mistake, and it goes into the wrong, not in the wrong hand, it doesn't go to those target people who really need to get an education. And right now we got so many dropouts and so few at the level that they should be at the university. We need to watch this very, very closely.
So I support early education, but done properly.
Okay.
It is a debatable issue. I've seen the data on the other side. The Head Start is a failure, abject failure. But if it was done right, and I don't think a secular-only program, another state bureaucracy, is a prescription for success. Now, following up on that, what good does a preschool program do, this beautiful plan of his do, if the kids then matriculate into failing high schools and secondary schools? What good is it?
You're passing them on to another system that cannot cope with nor benefit them in the long run.
Right. What good if Waianae and Nanakuli High School, and they do, by the way, have dropout rates at or about 30%, what good is preschool going to do that kid by the time they get there? It's all going to be negated through the cultural environment and the school situation that they have by the time they get to 9th grade. Any of that investment is washed away.
Well, Bob, the actual data does suggest unequivocally, and it's been over decades, the highest correlation with student achievement is parental involvement. I know you've got more than a half a dozen kids. Your involvement is directly correlated to their GPA, their sense of who they are, what they can do, and how smart they're going to be. More so than then after that, it's the teachers, and it's the community. Then it's, as Representative Takumi said, it's the health and welfare of the physical building and the plant. But it's really engaging the people with their parents that makes the huge difference. But I don't want to take time away from what you started with the teachers. Why can't we get a teacher's contract?
Well, because, so the teachers now ostensibly have been made whole. The governor is offering 2% to the teachers, a raise of 2%, he says. But when you increase their health care costs, they went from 50-50 to now the teachers, they went from 60-40, 60% was paid by the state, now it's 50-50. So the teachers have to pay more for their health care. So the 2% raise is eaten up by that, so it's like 1.1% or something. So they're looking at that, and he says, I don't have enough money, but I want to start this giant new program for preschool. And the teachers are like, what are you talking about? You're not going to make us whole. And Gina, Anecdotally, I've talked to teachers like you have, but there's a real morale problem. And two metrics point that out. One is the dropout rate, the teacher turnover rate we have in the state of Hawaii, 10% a year.
Every year, 10%?
Excluding retirements. 10% a year. And it costs us about $23 million to train, recruit, and bring in those new teachers every year.
You know, in the private sector, if you have 10% turnover and above, that means you got a real management problem.
Yeah.
10% is kind of like the level where there's a problem. What's the other metric?
The other metric is absenteeism. We have the second highest rate of absenteeism in the nation. Now people say, well, that's because kids have colds and they give the colds to teachers. Well, don't the kids at the other schools have colds?
Which no.
And by the way, we're in Hawaii. We ain't in Arkansas or Alaska
and we're in
Michigan.
February, and February is 10 degrees below in some of these places.
Yeah. So we have high teacher turnover, and then we have this extraordinarily high absentee rateism, and you say, we got a morale problem. The pay is one issue, and that will, you give them a bump up to 4%, they'll be happy for 6 or 7 months. But then the old issues will creep back in. The excessive burdening of administrative things. Fill out the forms. The administration gives it to the teacher's not teaching, they're filling out forms, they're collecting forms. Then if the form isn't filled in, they got to call the parents. Not about schoolwork, but you didn't turn in Johnny's form. That's what the administrators should be doing. And Lord knows we have enough of them. They should be doing that. The other thing is school discipline. The teacher needs to know that the parent stands shoulder to shoulder with them and the administration in addressing the behavior of problematic children. We don't have that today.
Oftentimes it's the opposite, in fact.
Principal or teacher calls up and says, you know, Johnny's been a bad boy. The parent will yell at the teacher.
Yeah.
And that's a cultural shift. That's problematic for them. Here's one that I used to think was a bunch of bull hockey.
Okay.
And that was teacher planning time. We need more planning time. And come on, planning. Come on. Then I talked to some teachers, and I said, look, no, Bob, we don't have a curriculum. I got to make my curriculum. I need to go on the internet. I need to go to the library. I got to create my curriculum. And that's where I learned about the difference between curriculum core standards and curriculum.
You used to teach at HBU. I used to teach at HBU in Chaminade. You know, if you don't have your curriculum, you're not ready to go in front of those students. And that takes a while. Usually it's for a 2-hour class, you got to almost do 4 hours worth of preparation. I mean, it's really, it's a time-consuming thing. What about the things that, when you've got to buy your own papers and other expenses?
That's unacceptable. We're paying for a, well, not quite a Punahou education, maybe a Marinol education, and we're getting a South Bronx product. I mean, when I went to school, you'd show up and you needed glue. There was a big glue jug, and everybody got their glue, and they put it in there. Or you needed scissors. There was a cigar box. You opened it up. Everybody took a scissors. At the end of class, you put it in. Same thing with rulers. All you had to do was show up with a number 2 pencil and your book and be ready to learn. No shortage of textbooks. None of these problems that we are befallen with constantly. Now, and I want to get to the last thing here for a second, but I want to make
we got to talk about the PLDC also.
Well, that's your issue. I'm not concerned about that. Okay, real quick. We might have to go on for an hour. Hey, so real quick, we talk about the system. We have systemic failures. The good news is we know how they need to be addressed. Paul Berman's report, 1988. One last thing. The principals and the DOE agreed to a performance evaluation contract. Teachers tell me, hey, the principal needs to be accountable. Principal says teachers need to be accountable, but they're both in these unions. Principals, the only union in the country. We have the only principals union in the nation. They agreed to a performance evaluation contract with the state. Took them 9 years.
That just came out a couple of months ago.
Out. Did you read anything in the paper? No, nobody cares. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel in 7 years on his back. It took 9 years to get a 30-page document that says nothing, means nothing, and is toothless. Just like the when we tried to get the teachers drug testing. Not one teacher was ever drug tested, and the contract came and went. This is the ineffective leadership that we have at all levels of government, and we got to change it. So that would be the. I could go on, but
so give us the prognosis. These are 3 areas of problems. What do you see? I mean, particularly because people who are watching want to know, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there going to be a turnaround? Given what we're doing with a private appointed board of education, given what early learning is proposed, given what is now slightly edging up of the results and the tests. What do you give me the long run that you see?
So you want me to tell you honestly, or you want me to?
I want you to say, as the representative of Eva Beach, what are the things that your constituents and mine can expect?
Well, our constituents can expect us to work very hard, but I think you will not see any meaningful reform. Certainly, while we have the current governor and the current House Education Chair, they are both beholden to the adult stakeholders in the room and not the children. That being said, the well has been poisoned so badly with this teacher's contract, despite the relationship with the adult stakeholders. The well has been poisoned so badly with the current governor that the teachers will not buy into any reform proposed by him. And no meaningful reform would ever come out of the House Education Committee because the relationship the chairman has with the adult stakeholders.
I'm perhaps a little bit more optimistic in the sense that once a good contract is registered and there's possible governance shifts. I know my daughter went to a public school for so many years, and they ran it basically like a private school because of the engagement of the parents, who are very, very much involved in what's going on. As you said, we have very limited time. I want to shift to
PLC,
which a lot of you have been concerned about. What was otherwise a public-private partnership on school premises is one of the children of the PLDC, is to take public lands and put it with a private development, a type of exemption of all the state, federal, and county regulations for the sake of getting money into the state coffers. There was a version of this under the Lingle administration with Laura Thielen when it was the recreational renaissance, charging fees at parks, etc. That didn't go anywhere, and then the PLDC came up 2 years ago, which in the middle of the night, the last minute when everything's on the table, and they scribble a new clause in there where all these exemptions came in. A lot of us were hoodwinked into passing that. Therefore, when the hue and cry came out where, hey, why are these things in there? Most people didn't know that that was actually the case. So the PLDC passed in 2011, only came to light, if you will, in 2012, a whole year later, that some of the ominous things in there are not going to meet the political muster, if you will, of a public that's democratic. So in effect, good news, bad news. Good news is we have killed the PLDC. We've repealed that act. But the bad news is, Bob, and this is where it gets right intersecting with your educational thesis that you've just given us, that there is a PLDC Harbors and there's a PLDC DOE. The PLDC Harbors is saying that basically we're going to take all the PLDC language out of the Harbors version of it, but we're going to do the same thing. Same thing with the DOE. And we're going to take the language out of the PLDC, but we're going to take, as the governor said, there's $1 billion worth of property on school premises between Makapu'u, or Hawaii Kai, and Farrington High School.
So, can I ask you a question? You're a businessman, wrote a book, you teach business, you're very knowledgeable, you're a small business caucus for years. When you're proposing a program to start preschools all over the state, you're going to need to put them somewhere in the left hand. And then the right hand wants to sell these school properties and vacant schools. Do you think these two guys ever talk to one another? I mean, he wants to put all these new schools, they got to be put somewhere. But on the other hand, he wants to sell the land that the smaller unused schools are on. How does that make sense
Well, it's not as much selling so much as getting the rents from, quote, workforce housing or other condominiums where
that's exciting.
It's in the housing that I've seen that's affordable, like the 80-story building that's proposed in downtown is like a studio for $1,500, $1,600 and a 2 or 3 bedroom for $2,700. To me, that's market. So the idea that we're going to build 21st century schools goes back to what I said earlier. The highest correlation is not the physical building. That's number 5 down, according to Roy Takumi. But the first one is the correlation with parental involvement, teacher involvement, community involvement, etc. That's where the rubber meets the road. Bob, we've almost run out of time. I want to go back with what you've said in terms of how important education is for you. You want to say anything about your district or your schools, or how you are just rooting for education as the representative from Ewa Beach?
We have a lot. We say that a lot in our business, but I work for the people of Ewa Beach, all the way from St. Francis Hospital, all the way down to the water on the Diamond Head side of Fort Weaver Road. So those schools are a mixture of some old and new, and it's really a blessing to work for those people. I do believe I'm their servant. We hold an office that's transitory. Don't get full of yourself, because there's always an election, and just remember you work for them.
That's well put.
I'm working for them, doing the best I can. I've met with many principals and teachers and got a lot of good insights. So
that seat that you're sitting in belongs to the people of Ewa Beach. The seat
great.
that I'm sitting in belongs to the people of Hawaii Kai. This has been Better Government. As you can see, we're trying to get a better educational system. Bob, this shouldn't be the first nor the last of that, because we've got to do better. We should not be second to any state or second to any nation in terms of educating our kids, our future. That's what it's going to be all about. Who are those kids and what can they do given the education they have? Thank you for watching Better Government. Tune in again in the future when we try to bring you a new, better way to do things for you, the people of Hawaii. Thank you for viewing. Aloha.